Time doesn't erase everything. Sometimes, it hides the truth until we're ready to see it. In 1964, a woman stepped out of her world and simply ceased to be. No farewell, no trace, only a memory caught between seconds. A mystery that would sleep for 6 decades beneath layers of silence. Then science whispered her name again. A single thread of DNA, pulled from the dust, rewove her story and reopened the doorway between past and present. Tonight, we follow that whisper. We step into the space where fact meets the impossible, where memory bends, and time itself becomes the witness. If you believe every mystery carries a lesson, if you feel the chill of the unknown calling, like, share, and comment below. Your voice keeps the story alive, and your curiosity fuels this growing circle of explorers. Subscribe, stay close, because the next mystery may already be unfolding. The perfect town. To understand the disappearance of Eleanor Whitmore, we first have to understand the world she vanished from. The year was 1964. The setting, Ashcroft, Massachusetts, a modest coastal town just outside Boston, where fishing boats lined the harbor and white church steeples cut through a gray Atlantic sky. It was the kind of place you could drive through in 10 minutes and miss entirely if you weren't looking. To locals, Ashcroft was safe, untouched by the chaos that was beginning to shake America in the mid-1960s. The Vietnam War was on the horizon. Civil rights marches were spreading across the South. But here, life followed a quieter rhythm. People trusted their neighbors. They went to church on Sundays, kept their doors unlocked, and believed evil was something that happened on television, not in their backyard. For Eleanor Whitmore, that world was home. She had been teaching third grade at Ashcroft Elementary School for 5 years, a favorite among students, known for her gentle patience and her belief that every child could be good if given the chance. Her colleagues described her as reserved, kind, and disciplined. She lived alone in a small colonial-style house on Maple Street, just 2 blocks from the school. She wasn't married, though some said there had been a broken engagement years earlier, a quiet heartbreak she never spoke of again. In 1964, a single woman living independently was rare in small-town Massachusetts. But Eleanor made it work. She spent evenings reading at the local library, volunteering at the community center, and helping her students with after-school lessons. In photographs, she looked calm, poised, the kind of woman who made you feel like the world was still good. When you look back at her life before that March evening, there are no warning signs, no enemies, no conflicts, no reason to vanish. But in every small town, there are undercurrents, quiet tensions that never make the front page. In Ashcroft, those tensions hid behind smiles and routine. There were rumors about the police chief's nephew, a young man who spent too much time near the school. There were whispers about land disputes near Haverhill Woods, where Eleanor's car would later be found. And there were stories, dismissed at the time, of a man in a dark sedan seen parked outside the elementary school in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. But in 1964, those were just stories, and Ashcroft was too proud, too self-assured, to believe danger could come from within. The Ashcroft Chronicle, the town's small weekly newspaper, ran local headlines about fishing permits, bake sales, and city council votes. Buried among them were brief police notes, unidentified car sighted near Maple Street, resident reports missing laundry from clothesline. Nothing seemed important. Not yet. The Friday before her disappearance, Eleanor attended a school board meeting where she presented a proposal to fund new art supplies. It was approved without question. Colleagues remember her leaving around 6:30 p.m., smiling, holding a stack of papers. That weekend, she planned to visit her sister in Boston. She never arrived. On Monday, March 16, 1964, her students arrived at school to find her classroom dark. Her lesson plans were neatly arranged, chalk dust still fresh on the board. Spelling test, Friday. The janitor assumed she was sick. By afternoon, her principal called her home. No answer. By the next morning, police were notified. And by Wednesday, her light blue Chevrolet was discovered, half submerged in a muddy trail off the edge of Haverhill Woods. Her disappearance was officially logged at 9:47 a.m. Case number is 64-317. Detective Charles Moran, a veteran officer from the Essex County Police Department, led the initial investigation. He described the scene as oddly undisturbed. The car doors were locked. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse lay on the seat, wallet intact, and a library book, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, rested on the dashboard. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No footprints leading away. It was as though Eleanor had stepped out into the darkness and simply vanished into the night air. That image, an empty car, doors locked, radio off, a single book left open, would haunt Ashcroft for generations. In the days that followed, the town transformed from peaceful to paranoid. Parents escorted children to school. Doors that had never been locked were bolted shut. Police patrolled empty streets at night, their headlights cutting through fog, looking for a ghost that had left no trace. Detectives followed every lead they could find. A traveling salesman who had been seen in town that week, that a mechanic who fixed Eleanor's car days earlier, but a local drifter who camped near the woods. Each lead ended the same way. Nowhere. Every trail went cold within days. The first few weeks after a disappearance are crucial, but as time passes, evidence fades, and so does memory. Witnesses forget. Paperwork gets misfiled. And in small towns like Ashcroft, silence becomes a kind of survival. By summer of 1964, the investigation had hit a wall. Without a body, without evidence, and without witnesses, there was nothing more they could do. The case was marked inactive. Eleanor's family put up flyers, held candlelight vigils, and eventually gave up hope. Decades later, when investigators reopened the case, they would find missing notes, incomplete logs, and entire boxes of evidence never cataloged. But at the time, no one imagined how deep the story truly went, or how close the truth had always been. In 1964, Ashcroft called itself the perfect town. But perfection, as history often proves, has cracks. And through those cracks, something dark had already slipped inside. In Chapter 2, we follow the first days of the investigation, the searches, the press conferences, and the clues that didn't make sense. Because in every cold case, the first mistakes are the ones that matter most. The search that found nothing. By dawn on March 17, 1964, Ashcroft, Massachusetts, was no longer the quiet town it had always been. Dozens of residents had gathered near Haverhill Woods, drawn by whispers of the missing teacher whose car had been found by the marsh. It was cold that morning, cold enough that their breath hung like smoke as officers roped off the scene. Detective Charles Moran, leading the case, made a simple statement to the local press. "We are confident Miss Whitmore will be found soon. There's no reason to believe foul play." But even as he spoke those words, his men were combing through mud, bushes, and shallow pools, looking for any trace of a struggle, a footprint, a torn piece of fabric, anything. They found nothing. When investigators opened Eleanor's Chevrolet, the first thing they noticed was how clean everything was. No dirt on the floor mats. No fingerprints other than hers. No damage to the car. It was as though the vehicle had been parked deliberately, with care. The trunk was empty, save for a spare tire and a box of chalk, the same kind she used in class. Her handbag, still on the passenger seat, contained her driver's license, a few coins, a half-used lipstick, and a receipt for gas purchased 2 days before. Everything was perfectly ordinary. Too ordinary. The first search party was made up of 15 local officers, assisted by 30 volunteers, fishermen, shopkeepers, and high school students. They swept the woods for nearly 12 hours. By nightfall, they'd found only a single clue, a woman's scarf snagged on a branch. It wasn't Eleanor's. Meanwhile, back in town, the Ashcroft Chronicle ran its first front-page story in nearly 2 years. The headline read, "Local Teacher Missing, Police Continue Search." The article was brief, factual, almost detached, but it sent ripples through the community. Parents pulled their children from school. Neighbors whispered that something was being covered up. And every single person in town had a theory. In the first 48 hours, leads poured in. One witness claimed to have seen Eleanor at a gas station in nearby Gloucester late Friday night. Another insisted she'd boarded a Boston-bound train that same evening. A third said they'd seen a light blue car on the Ashcroft Bridge around midnight, its headlights flickering. Every lead conflicted with the others, and when detectives checked them, none held up. No ticket records, no confirmed sightings. By the third day, the trail was already going cold. Moran's team expanded their search area, 5 square miles of woods and coastline. State police brought in bloodhounds, but heavy rain wiped away any trace that might have remained. It was as if nature itself had swallowed her whole. The more they searched, the more it seemed like Eleanor had simply stepped out of existence. Then came a first real break, or what they thought was one. A fisherman, Thomas Keene, told police he'd found a piece of clothing tangled near the inlet at Greystone Harbor, 7 miles north of where her car had been found. The item was described as a torn section of a blue dress, possibly cotton. Eleanor had been last seen wearing a pale blue dress. Detectives rushed to the site, but by the time they arrived, the tide had carried it away. The evidence gone. Over the following week, hundreds joined the search. Boy Scouts, local businesses, even church groups. Posters went up across Massachusetts. Missing, Eleanor Whitmore, 29, last seen March 13, 1964. Reward, $1,000. But no matter how far they looked, the story was the same. No footprints, no body, no signs of violence, just questions. As days turned into weeks, the police began to change their tone. Detective Moran quietly told reporters, "We're exploring all possibilities, including voluntary disappearance." To Eleanor's family, that was unthinkable. She had a stable job, no debts, no secrets, at least none anyone knew of. But then, one officer made a discovery that shifted everything. Inside Eleanor's desk at the elementary school, he found a sealed envelope addressed to no one. It contained a single torn photograph, the image of a man standing in front of a lake. The top half of his face was burned away. When questioned, none of her colleagues recognized the man. Her sister didn't either. The photo had no date, no markings, and no explanation. Was it a clue, or just a fragment of some forgotten memory? No one knew. Without evidence, public interest began to fade. The newspapers moved on. But in Ashcroft, something had changed. For the first time, residents began locking their doors. For the first time, the evening news led with fear. And though no one could say why, many in town reported the same eerie detail. On quiet nights, near Haverhill Woods, people swore they could hear the faint sound of a woman's voice calling out a name before vanishing into the wind. 6 days after Eleanor vanished, the official search was scaled back. The police called it a missing persons case. Her family called it a nightmare, and Ashcroft called it a tragedy. But what no one called it, not yet, was murder. That word would come years later when a new detective reopened the files and found something the original team had missed. The detective who wouldn't let go. By summer of 1964, most of Massachusetts had moved on. The search for Eleanor Whitmore had faded into local legend, the kind of story old men tell at diners, with the line, "She just vanished," right out of thin air. But for one man, the case refused to let go. Detective Charles Moran, the lead investigator, wasn't supposed to take it personally, but he did, and before long, that obsession would consume him. Moran was a veteran of 20 years on the force, a man of method, structured, calm, unshaken by horror. He'd solved robberies, homicides, kidnappings. But this was different. Every time he tried to close the file, something pulled him back. A question unanswered, a note unfinished, a sound he couldn't forget. In his nightly reports, he wrote things that seemed almost poetic for a detective. The woods breathed differently after midnight. Someone out there knows how she disappeared, and they're still here. The department told him to move on. The higher-ups wanted results, not ghosts. But Moran didn't move on. SFX, drawer opens, paper rustles, match striking, cigarette drag. He began rereading every witness statement, every photo, every piece of physical evidence. It became routine: arrive at his desk before dawn, leave well past midnight. The office janitor later recalled seeing him sitting alone in the dark, staring at the photograph of Eleanor's car. He told people he could hear something in that silence, something he'd missed. Then one night, while reviewing the old evidence log, Moran noticed something odd. The scarf found in the woods, the one that wasn't Eleanor's, had been logged twice. 2 separate tags, 2 different dates. One labeled March 15th, the other March 19th. But only one piece of fabric existed. That mistake, that inconsistency, lit the first spark of suspicion. If evidence had been re-entered, someone had tampered with it. Someone who wanted to control the narrative. Moran confronted the evidence clerk, a quiet man named Harvey Donnell, who insisted both tags were just clerical. But days later, Donnell abruptly transferred to another division, then retired early. When Moran tried to contact him again, the man was gone. From that moment, Moran began keeping his own secret notes, separate from the official record. He stored them in a red leather notebook that he never let out of his sight. Inside were sketches of the woods, redrawn maps of tire tracks, and pages of theories. Names circled, crossed out, rewritten. One name appeared more than once. J. Halpern. At first, no one knew who that was. Later, it would become clear that Halpern was a contractor working near the area at the time, one who'd been questioned briefly, then dismissed after a 5-minute interview. But Moran noticed something chilling. Halpern's company truck matched the light blue vehicle a witness had mentioned on the Ashcroft Bridge that night. And somehow, his statement had vanished from the official case file. It was then that Moran realized the case might not just be unsolved. It might have been buried. He began to keep things off record, following leads in secret. He visited Halpern's property twice without a warrant, photographing the place. Neighbors reported strange behavior. Lights in the woods, dogs barking late, footprints near fences. But Moran didn't stop. He believed Eleanor's disappearance wasn't random. He believed she'd trusted someone that night. Someone who knew her routine, her kindness, her trust in people. As months passed, Moran's obsession deepened. His wife left him. His colleagues called him paranoid. And by 1966, the department quietly reassigned him to a desk job. But he didn't stop investigating. In private, Moran began visiting Eleanor's sister, Margaret Whitmore, who still lived in Ashcroft. She told him something that had never been in the reports, that 2 weeks before Eleanor vanished, she'd mentioned being followed home from school. When Moran asked if she'd reported it, Margaret shook her head. She thought it was her imagination, said it was probably someone from town. That detail, though small, reframed everything. If she'd been watched, the disappearance wasn't spontaneous, it was planned. And if it was planned, the perpetrator knew exactly when and where she'd be alone. Moran went back through old road reports, checking who had access to work near the school. He found that one contractor had a permit to repair power lines in the area during the same week Eleanor disappeared. That contractor, J. Halpern. When Moran tried to locate him, he discovered Halpern had moved out of Massachusetts a year after the disappearance. He'd left no forwarding address. Still, Moran followed the trail, writing letters, making calls, following any trace he could. But by 1971, he hit a wall. And then something strange happened. One morning, Moran arrived at the station to find that his personal red notebook, the one he'd kept locked in his drawer, was gone. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. Just gone. When he asked to see the evidence archives that same day, he was told the Whitmore file had been transferred for storage. But when he asked where, no one could tell him. The file had disappeared, just like Eleanor. By 1972, Charles Moran resigned from the force. He left behind no forwarding address, no public statement, only a note scribbled on the back of an old case photo. She's still out there, and so is he. He was never seen again. For 50 years, his name would barely appear in police records. But when the case was reopened decades later, investigators would discover that his missing notebook hadn't been lost at all. It had been hidden in the attic of the very police station where he'd once worked. And inside that notebook was something that changed everything. A fragment of fabric, taped to a page, marked with the words, "Found near Greystone Harbor." Keene was right. The torn blue cloth, the one that vanished with the tide. Somehow, Moran had found it, and soon, that piece of fabric would become the key evidence. The one thing capable of solving a 60-year-old mystery. The return of the evidence. For nearly 60 years, the name Eleanor Whitmore existed only as a footnote, a missing person presumed dead. The case was sealed, forgotten, archived beneath decades of newer crimes. Until one January morning in 2024, when a maintenance worker in the Ashcroft Police Department attic stumbled upon an old, dust-covered storage box. Inside was a time capsule of the past. Faded crime scene photographs, yellowed index cards, a rusted badge, and a small red notebook. The front cover read simply, "Whitmore Case, Private Notes, C. Moran." For the younger officers on duty, the name Moran meant nothing. To them, he was just another detective from another era. But when forensic archivist Kendra Lowell opened that notebook, she instantly realized what she was holding: the private records of the original lead investigator. Inside were sketches of maps, lists of witness names, even unsent letters. But what truly caught her, it was a single envelope taped to the final page, labeled in faded pen. Greystone fabric, do not discard. Inside that envelope was a small, weathered piece of cloth. Torn, water-stained, and brittle with age. For 6 decades, it had been missing from evidence, and now, somehow, it was back. The department immediately contacted the Massachusetts Cold Case Review Unit, who sent the sample to the State Forensic Lab in Cambridge. Modern technology would do what 1964 science never could. The analysis began with fiber microscopy, confirming the material matched mid-century cotton weave, consistent with the type used in women's dresses of the 1960s. Next came chemical residue testing. Trace elements revealed 2 surprising substances: engine oil and a faint signature of marine salt, both suggesting exposure to water and machinery. But it was the DNA extraction that changed everything. Even after 60 years, the fabric still held microscopic cells. Using next-generation sequencing, technicians isolated a partial mitochondrial profile, and within days, the lab confirmed a match to Eleanor Whitmore's surviving niece, whose DNA was on record from a genealogy test. It was her dress. After 60 years, they'd found proof of life and proof of death. The fragment was enough to reopen the entire case. The Ashcroft Police Department announced it would reclassify the disappearance as a homicide investigation. But as detectives examined Moran's old notes, they uncovered something far more disturbing. Cryptic lines that hinted he'd discovered evidence implicating someone within the department itself. Scrawled in uneven handwriting were words that chilled the new investigators. They know what happened. They were there. Greystone wasn't the first sight. That single note ignited a wave of questions. Who were they? What did Moran mean by wasn't the first sight? Detective Henry Mallory, leading the reopened case, believed Moran had discovered something big, something he wasn't supposed to. And whatever he found, it may have been the reason both he and his notes disappeared for decades. Using digital forensics, Mallory's team scanned the notebook for hidden impressions, faint markings left by pen pressure. Under spectral light, one phrase appeared, invisible to the naked eye. Halpern, east of the bridge, 2 miles north. That location pointed directly to Greystone Harbor, where Moran's notes claimed the fabric was found. But the phrase east of the bridge suggested there was another site, a second dump area, that no one had ever searched. By early spring 2024, ground-penetrating radar was deployed across the Greystone coastline. For weeks, the team found nothing but old debris and fishing scrap. Then, on the 3rd week, something appeared on the radar, a disturbance in the soil, nearly 8 feet deep, roughly 2 miles from Ashcroft Bridge. Excavation began immediately. What they uncovered would confirm Moran's theory and expose a truth long buried under silence and loyalty. At a depth of 6 feet, beneath layers of sand and clay, investigators uncovered human remains, partial skeletal fragments, wrapped in decayed fabric fibers that matched the blue cotton sample from Moran's notebook. The site was officially logged as Recovery Site 2024 Whitmore. Dental analysis confirmed it. After 6 decades, they had found Eleanor Whitmore. Forensic anthropologists determined she died from cranial trauma, likely caused by blunt force. No evidence of animal disturbance. No signs of self-harm. It was murder. But the most haunting discovery was the position of her remains. Carefully arranged, arms folded over her chest, like someone had placed her there with deliberate care. That detail struck investigators deeply, because it suggested that whoever killed Eleanor also wanted to bury her with dignity. Inside the burial soil, forensic analysts found traces of synthetic paint, the same type used in automotive repair facilities in the 1960s. That detail drew detectives' attention straight back to Moran's most persistent name, J. Halpern. Halpern had worked in a garage located just 5 miles from the site. He had the tools, the vehicle, and, according to Moran's unfiled interview notes, a connection to the Whitmore family through a night school class he attended briefly in 1963. The pieces at last began to align. Mallory's team began tracing Halpern's life after he left Massachusetts. Records showed he relocated to New Hampshire in 1966, then again to Maine in the 1970s. He died in 1989, never charged, never questioned again. But the story didn't end there. DNA doesn't die with a man, it lingers in his descendants. And when investigators tested the fabric against modern databases, it revealed one last shock: a partial familial match to a living relative, someone who still resided less than 30 miles from Ashcroft. For the first time in 60 years, the Whitmore case had a name, a living name. But before they could act, a storm hit the Massachusetts coast, flooding Greystone Harbor and temporarily halting field operations. It was as if history, once again, refused to release its grip. Still, one thing was certain. The story Detective Moran began in 1964 had finally found its voice. The evidence had returned. The silence had broken. And for the first time, justice felt possible. But as the investigation deepened, what they uncovered next would reveal that Eleanor Whitmore's disappearance wasn't an isolated crime. It was part of something much darker, a pattern that stretched across decades. A web of silence. By spring 2024, the discovery of Eleanor Whitmore's remains made headlines across New England. 60 years of questions, silence, and speculation had finally cracked open. But as the dust settled, something darker began to surface, a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Detective Henry Mallory and his cold case team began re-examining missing persons reports from 1960 to 1970. They weren't looking for coincidences. They were looking for rhymes. And what they found would change how Massachusetts remembered its own history. The file showed a disturbing consistency. Between 1962 and 1967, 5 women, all between the ages of 25 and 35, had gone missing within a 50-mile radius of Ashcroft. Each had last been seen alone, usually after dark. Each case ended the same way. No witnesses that in no struggle, in no body. And in every one of those investigations, the lead detective had been Charles Moran. At first glance, that connection seemed meaningless. After all, Moran had been one of the only senior investigators in the region at the time. But as the team dug deeper, another, more troubling link emerged. In at least 3 of those cases, Moran's reports mentioned the same name, Halpern, sometimes as a contractor working nearby, other times as a helpful witness who assisted with local searches. But there was one entry in Moran's red notebook that Mallory couldn't ignore. A line written in shaky pen. 5 gone. 1 found. Same eyes. What did he mean by same eyes? Was it a metaphor? A connection between victims? Or was it something Moran had literally seen? The team began cross-referencing autopsy records, photos, and witness sketches. To their shock, several of the missing women resembled one another. Same dark hair, same sharp jawline, same blue-green eyes. It wasn't random. It was selection. To understand the pattern, Mallory's team reached out to Dr. Amelia Crow, a criminal psychologist specializing in historical offender profiling. After reviewing the available data, she proposed a chilling theory. This wasn't opportunistic. It was ritualistic. The victims weren't just taken, they were chosen. According to Crow, whoever was responsible didn't kill out of impulse. They killed out of compulsion, repeating a ritual that satisfied some deep, unspoken obsession. And that obsession might have been tied to a specific type of woman: teachers, caretakers, women who represented innocence and order. Eleanor Whitmore fit that pattern perfectly, but there was still a missing link. If this was the work of a single killer, why did Moran's own department never connect the dots? Why did these files vanish for decades? The answer began to take shape when Mallory's forensic archivist noticed something strange. Several 1960s police reports, including those connected to the Whitmore case, had been typed on a different machine than all other department records. Different spacing, different ink, and one peculiar detail. Each report ended with a signature that wasn't Moran's, but belonged to his superior, Captain Raymond Holt. Holt had signed off on multiple missing persons reports, all with nearly identical wording. No further evidence located. Case inactive. When Mallory searched for Holt's personal files, he found that every one of them had been destroyed in a 1975 records purge. A purge Holt himself had authorized before his retirement. For the first time, it appeared the silence surrounding the Whitmore case wasn't just incompetence. It was intentional. Someone inside the department had made sure those cases stayed cold. The deeper Mallory went, the clearer the pattern became. Each disappearance coincided with infrastructure work, bridge repairs, electrical maintenance, or construction projects. And every single project had been subcontracted to one company, Halpern and Sons Electrical. When the team tracked down corporate records, they found the company had quietly dissolved in 1969, its assets transferred to a holding group in Maine, a group partially owned by retired Captain Holt. It was the connection Moran had hinted at in his notes. The phrase "they were there" wasn't about strangers. It was about his own colleagues. Moran had stumbled onto something massive, a network of corruption that blurred the line between law enforcement and crime. He must have realized it too late. And once he did, the file vanished. In the months following the rediscovery of Eleanor's remains, Mallory's team began quietly interviewing surviving officers who had served under Captain Holt. Most were elderly now, frail, hesitant, reluctant to revisit the past. But one, Harold Meacham, broke the silence. He confirmed that back in 1964, the department had received a confidential directive from the county prosecutor's office. Limit public speculation regarding Whitmore case. Maintain narrative of voluntary disappearance. When Mallory asked why, Meacham hesitated, then whispered, because someone high up was afraid Moran was right. For 6 decades, the truth had been locked behind loyalty, fear, and silence. But now, with DNA evidence and digital forensics, the wall of secrecy was crumbling. Mallory prepared a comprehensive report for the state attorney's office, one that connected 5 cold cases, 1 missing detective, and a web of silence that had protected a killer for half a century. But before he could deliver it, something unexpected happened. On the evening of June 3, 2024, the cold case office received an anonymous package. No return address. Inside, an old film reel labeled simply Haverhill 1965. When they played it, the room fell silent. It was grainy, black and white footage, but clear enough to make out the faces. 2 uniformed officers, 1 man in plain clothes, and a woman standing by the edge of the woods. The woman was Eleanor Whitmore. The timestamp read March 14, 1964, the night before she vanished. The man beside her was unmistakable. Even through the static, his name badge could be read. R. Holt. Captain Holt, the man who'd buried the case from the inside. The web of silence had begun to tear, and through its cracks, the truth was finally bleeding through. But the next discovery would go beyond corruption, beyond murder, and straight into the realm of something far more chilling. Because the footage didn't just show what happened that night. It showed who else had been there. The film that shouldn't exist. There's something eerie about old film. The hiss, the flicker, the way faces move like ghosts trapped between frames. When the team played the reel labeled Haverhill 1965, it felt like opening a time capsule that should have stayed sealed. On screen, A clearing in the Massachusetts woods, March wind sweeping through bare branches. A police cruiser parked just off the dirt road. Two officers, one older, stocky, the other younger, shifting nervously. A woman in a pale coat stands near the tree line. The timestamp reads March 14th, 1964, 11:42 p.m., the night Eleanor Whitmore vanished. And, standing just a few feet away, was Captain Raymond Holt. The footage ran for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. It had no audio, just the grainy black and white images of something that looked procedural at first. But halfway through, the camera shifts, shakily, as if the operator's hand trembled. The woman takes a hesitant step forward. A flash of light, then darkness. When the frame stabilizes, Eleanor is gone. No struggle, no movement, just gone. The camera lingers on Holt. He glances directly into the lens, almost knowingly, and the reel cuts to black. For the investigators in 2024, the film was more than evidence. It was a confession caught in time. But there was a problem. When forensic analysts reviewed the footage, they discovered something that shouldn't have been possible. The reel stock, Kodak TRIX 400, hadn't been manufactured until 1965, a full year after the timestamp on the footage, meaning the video couldn't have been shot when it claimed to be. So who filmed it, and why fake the date? Detective Mallory ordered the film sent to a digital forensic lab in Boston for spectral analysis. What they found added another layer to the mystery. When the footage was enhanced, faint reflections became visible in the car's rear window, the blurred outline of another man standing beside the camera. His face obscured, but his posture unmistakable, tall, lean, left-handed. Mallory froze. That description matched one person from the 1960s case files. Detective Charles Moran. If Moran filmed that footage, he might have been documenting Holt's crimes. Maybe he caught his superior in the act and paid for it with his life. But that theory unraveled quickly. Lab results revealed the camera model used, a Bell & Howell 214, manufactured only after 1965. By that year, Moran had already vanished. So, if it wasn't Moran, who was holding the camera, the lab noticed something else. A barely visible number etched into the corner of one frame. Hashtag 67B. When run through the state archives, it matched an internal classification system used by the Massachusetts Bureau of Investigation's Training Division, specifically a set of tapes created for psychological conditioning exercises. In other words, this wasn't just a record of a crime. It was part of an experiment. Mallory's team cross-referenced Bureau files and found a single reference to something called Project Halcyon, a 1960s pilot program designed to train law enforcement officers to manage trauma through desensitization. The exercises involved reenacting real cases, often using actual crime scene footage. The chilling realization hit. Eleanor's disappearance may have been used as training material, a case they never solved, yet one they simulated over and over again. But if that was true, why was Holt in the footage? Why did the reel look so authentic? And why did it show a woman vanishing into thin air? Mallory sent the footage for AI motion stabilization. Frame by frame, the enhanced images revealed new details. The outline of a second vehicle, headlights off, parked deeper in the woods, that a strange sigil carved into a nearby tree trunk. Circular, intersecting lines forming a triangle. And at the edge of one frame, a figure holding what appeared to be a camera of their own. Two cameramen, two perspectives, and only one film ever surfaced. The symbol on the tree matched sketches found in Detective Moran's notebooks, a pattern he'd labeled the Seal of Three. To him, it was the signature of a cult-like group rumored to operate along the New England coast during the 1960s. Men in law enforcement, local businessmen, and even clergymen who allegedly performed initiation rituals involving the cleansing of innocence. Until now, no one had ever taken Moran's theory seriously. But the real, the vanished woman, the presence of Holt, the matching symbol, made it impossible to dismiss. Mallory realized the investigation was no longer just about a murder. It was about an entire system built to bury it, a system that might still have roots today. When he cross-checked descendants of Halpern and Sons and the Bureau officials who authorized Project Halcyon, he found a disturbing connection. A current state senator, Alan Holt, Raymond Holt's grandson, sat on the Oversight Committee for Historical Justice Initiatives, the same committee that approved funding for cold case reopenings. The past wasn't just returning, it was still here, wearing new names and cleaner faces. The team knew the film couldn't be shown publicly without jeopardizing their safety. But before they sealed it into evidence, Mallory noticed one final, almost imperceptible detail in the last frame. A single handwritten message scratched into the edge of the film itself. Find the others before they find you. Someone had left that warning, decades ago, for whoever would one day open the reel. And now, 60 years later, it had finally reached the right hands. But what did the others mean? Were there more reels? More victims? Or was someone still trying to finish what began in 1964? As Mallory stared at the flickering image of Eleanor Whitmore one last time, he realized this wasn't the end of the case. It was only the beginning of something bigger, deeper, and far more dangerous. The film that shouldn't exist had reopened a door that had been locked for 6 decades. And once it opened, there was no closing it again. Echoes in the ashes. The footage leaked. Not officially, not through the department or the courts, but through a shadowed channel, an encrypted drive sent anonymously to an independent journalist in Boston. Within 48 hours, the Haverhill reel hit the digital underground. Clips appeared on true crime forums, Reddit threads, even midnight podcasts dissecting every flicker and shadow. The world had finally seen what Massachusetts law enforcement had buried for 60 years. Eleanor Whitmore moments before her disappearance. The reaction was immediate. News outlets flooded the town of Ashcroft, once forgotten, now swarmed by reporters, documentarians, and the curious. For the first time since 1964, Eleanor Whitmore's name was everywhere, printed in headlines, whispered in grocery lines, projected on courtroom walls. But for Detective Henry Mallory, the media frenzy was a double-edged sword. The exposure brought momentum, but also brought fear. Because someone, somewhere, wanted that footage found, and someone else was furious that it had been. Inside the cold case office, the team worked tirelessly to authenticate the reel. They re-examined every frame, every reflection, every timestamp. Each new discovery only deepened the mystery. And then came the tip that changed everything. A man, Walt Grady, 81 years old, contacted the station. A retired electrician who had once worked for Halpern and Sons Electrical. He claimed to have information about Eleanor's disappearance. When the team met him, his hand shook so badly he could barely hold his cup of coffee. He'd been waiting decades, he said, to tell someone the truth. Walter Grady, archival tape. I was there that night. Not in the woods, not at first. I was working the substation near Haverhill. We were told to shut down a section of power for maintenance, but nobody ever showed up to do the work. Just Captain Holt and 2 men I didn't recognize. One of them had a woman in the back seat. Grady said he'd heard a scream, distant, cut short by wind. Moments later, he saw a flicker of fire through the trees, a burst of light that faded as quickly as it came. When he asked Holt the next day about the incident, the captain told him to keep his mouth shut or end up like the girl. Grady never spoke again, until now. His testimony aligned perfectly with the timestamp on the film. And yet, there was still one part of his story that confused investigators. He said he saw the light, but not the fire. And when pressed for details, he whispered, it wasn't fire. It was something else. Like the air split open. Those words sent chills through the room. The forensic analyst replayed the film once more, adjusting contrast and luminance. And there it was, in a single frame, a distorted blur behind Eleanor Whitmore, bending the light like heat, shimmering as if reality itself was warping. To most, it looked like damaged film stock. But to Mallory, it felt like something more. He couldn't shake the feeling that what Grady saw that night wasn't just a crime, but something that transcended explanation. Still, in the real world of courts and evidence, Mallory had a deal in facts. And the facts were damning. Holt was dead. Halpern and Sons had vanished into shell companies. But someone had orchestrated this cover-up for 6 decades, and someone had the power to make it all disappear again. When Mallory submitted his updated report, the department responded with an abrupt order. Cease public communication pending federal review. That's when the threats began. Voicemail, 2:13 a.m. Stop digging, detective. Some graves are meant to stay closed. The more Mallory exposed, the more resistance he faced. Internal systems failed. Files disappeared from the evidence database. Even his own case notes were wiped overnight. And yet, something unexpected began to happen online. Thousands of people, amateur sleuths, genealogists, historians, began working together, analyzing the film frame by frame, comparing license plates, uniforms, even the patterns of the trees in the background. Within weeks, a user from Salem claimed to have matched the tree carvings from the reel to a preserved oak on state land. The same oak where a decades-old burn mark still lingered on its roots. When Mallory's team arrived, ground-penetrating radar confirmed it. Human remains. The skeletal structure matched Eleanor's size and age. But the DNA told a stranger story. The remains were female, but not Eleanor Whitmore. The discovery meant one of two things. Either the reel didn't show Eleanor's final moments, or there had been another woman in those woods that night. The second victim's identity was never filed in any police record, but forensic genealogists managed to trace her DNA to a missing woman named Lydia Carver, last seen in 1962, 2 years before Eleanor disappeared. It was no longer a single case. It was a pattern of ritual disappearances stretching across the decade, all under Holt's watch. Public outrage exploded. Protests outside the Massachusetts State Police headquarters. Families of other cold cases demanding answers. The words "echoes in the ashes" became the rallying cry across social media. The pressure forced the state attorney's office to reopen every case tied to Captain Holt and the Halpern Company network. But inside the cold case unit, Mallory and his team felt no victory. They felt watched. Anonymous vehicles idled outside their homes. Emails vanished mid-send. Someone knew they were getting close and wanted to remind them that the past still had teeth. Yet despite the fear, one thing became clear. The truth was fighting its way to the surface, no matter who tried to bury it. Eleanor Whitmore's voice, silenced in 1964, was echoing back through time, through ash, through film, through the tremors of guilt that still haunted the town that forgot her. And then another envelope arrived. No name, no return address. Inside, a single Polaroid photograph. It showed a dimly lit basement, concrete walls, and a date scrawled in red ink. April 1964. In the corner of the photo, reflected in a cracked mirror, the unmistakable figure of Eleanor Whitmore. Alive. The question was no longer who killed her. It was how she vanished and why she was seen again. The woman in the mirror. The Polaroid was unlike anything Detective Mallory had ever seen. The colors, oversaturated, almost too clear for a photograph supposedly taken in 1964. The timestamp scrawled in red ink read April 3rd, 1964, 3 weeks after Eleanor Whitmore vanished. And in that cracked mirror, half concealed by shadow, the reflection showed her unmistakable face. Same coat, same pendant, same haunted eyes, but behind her something else. A figure, tall, featureless, standing too still to be human. Mallory stared at the photo for hours, searching for logic, a digital forgery, an AI-generated image, anything that could explain how a woman declared dead 6 decades ago was now staring back through time. But the Polaroid passed every forensic test. The chemical aging was genuine. The ink matched 1960s composition, and the photo paper was traced to a single Kodak batch used by the Massachusetts Bureau of Investigation. Someone had taken it, and someone inside the system had kept it hidden. When Mallory compared the background of the photo to regional maps, a breakthrough emerged. The cracked basement wall wasn't random. It matched the blueprints of an abandoned state research facility outside Ipswich, shut down in 1969 after a chemical fire. The lab had been officially owned by Halpern Industrial Laboratories, the same corporation connected to the old electrical contracts and Captain Holt's secret funding network. The team went in quietly, without clearance. Just Mallory, two forensic analysts, and a crime scene photographer. They entered through a half-collapsed tunnel that once fed into the lower storage levels. The air was thick with dust and rusted iron. Moss crept up the walls like veins, and yet, someone had been there recently. Old power cables still hummed faintly. A portable generator, modern and clean, sat in the corner. And in the far end of the room, the same cracked mirror from the photograph. Its surface was mottled with corrosion and time, but behind the grime, faint writing appeared when hit by light. "She is not alone." The words weren't carved. They were burned into the glass. And on the floor beneath the mirror, they found something stranger. A small glass vial, sealed with wax, containing what appeared to be a strip of developed photographic film. The team rushed it back to the lab. When digitized, the frames revealed a haunting progression. A woman, Eleanor Whitmore, sitting in the same basement room. Each frame taken seconds apart. But as the reel advanced, her face began to blur, her features stretching, fading, dissolving into streaks of light. By the final frame, the chair was empty. The analysts argued over the footage for days. Some believed it was a trick of exposure, an error caused by film degradation. But Mallory couldn't shake the feeling that it was deliberate, that someone wanted to show them what really happened that night in 1964. Then came another discovery. Hidden in the basement's archives were research notes, stamped with the Halpern Company seal, but labeled under a different project name. Temporal Cognition Study, Phase 3. According to the surviving records, the facility had been conducting memory distortion experiments on small groups of volunteers, testing whether trauma could be reset through exposure to controlled electromagnetic fields. But one note stood out, dated March 10th, 1964. For days before Eleanor vanished, it read, "Subject W has begun showing spontaneous cognitive echo. Displacement noted. Maintain observation. If confirmed, classify as temporal anomaly A." Subject W. Whitmore. Suddenly, the pieces began to realign. What if Eleanor hadn't just been abducted? What if she'd been taken into a government-funded experiment masquerading as an industrial contract? One that tried to manipulate memory, time, and consciousness and went terribly wrong. Forensic scans of the basement revealed faint traces of ionized radiation, consistent with 1960s magnetic field experimentation, a technology decades ahead of its time. This wasn't science fiction. It was documented history. And yet, no record of the temporal cognition study existed in any official archive. It had been erased, just like the missing women. Mallory found himself trapped between two impossible versions of the same story. The first, a cold case of corruption and murder buried by men like Captain Holt. The second, a scientific experiment that blurred the line between death and disappearance. But then, another anomaly emerged. When comparing the facial metrics of Eleanor's 1960s photographs with the forensic reconstruction of her recovered skull, AI analysis found a 96% match, except for one detail. The woman in the photograph was 2 centimeters shorter than the skeleton. The bone density also indicated she had been exposed to radiation at a level equivalent to several hours near a high-output magnetic core. It was as though 2 versions of the same woman existed, one alive in the photo, one dead beneath the oak. Was the real showing her death, or her escape? As Mallory replayed the final frames of the basement footage, he noticed something subtle, a reflection in the mirror behind Eleanor's dissolving image. The same faint distortion seen in the Haverhill reel. But this time, within that shimmer, another face appeared. Older, tired, but unmistakably hers. Eleanor Whitmore, at 60 years old. The woman who vanished in 1964 might have lived long enough to see her own case reopened in 2024. And somewhere, somehow, that reflection, frozen in the mirror, was her final message. You can't solve what isn't finished. The writing, the films, the distortions, it all pointed to one chilling truth. Eleanor's disappearance wasn't just an accident of time. It was a designed event, part of a loop that refused to close. And if that was true, then the next discovery could finally explain what the town of Ashcroft and the state of Massachusetts had been hiding for 60 years. Because beneath the ashes of the Ipswich lab, investigators were about to uncover something far more tangible than film or mirrors. They were about to find the machine that made it all possible. The machine beneath the ashes. Beneath the scorched remains of the Ipswich Research Facility lay a sealed corridor, one not found on any of the official blueprints. The floor was half buried in compacted soot, and the air carried the sharp sting of burnt insulation. It was Detective Mallory who noticed it first, a section of the basement wall that didn't echo like the others. He pressed his palm against the concrete. Hollow. Behind that wall, a hidden chamber waited, untouched for 6 decades. And inside it, the final secret of the Halpern Corporation's forgotten project. They called it Sublevel 5, and in the center of that room stood something that defied every law of physics and reason. It looked like a massive steel arch, cables and copper coils spidering across its frame, connected to a control panel littered with analog dials, oscilloscopes, and a single red lever labeled Cycle Initiate. Dust coated everything except the glass chamber at the heart of the structure. That somehow was spotless. When the technicians restored partial power, the machine came alive. Lights blinking to life, needles trembling on the gauges. The old generator upstairs had found a current, and something deep inside the machine was still awake. Mallory's team recorded everything. The readings, the electromagnetic field, the unusual heat signatures. Every test pointed to one undeniable truth. This device wasn't designed for energy production. It was built for frequency modulation of human neural activity. The technical manuals, retrieved from a rusted filing cabinet in the same chamber, confirmed it. Halpern Industries had been experimenting on what they called perceptual looping. They believed memories, and by extension, consciousness, could be detached from a flow of time if exposed to the right frequency. Each subject entered the machine for 10 minutes. Some came out disoriented. Others never came out at all. One document was marked Test Sequence 7, W/04. The W matched the initials found earlier, Whitmore. And according to the log, Eleanor Whitmore was the final subject before the project was abruptly terminated. But what the log described next didn't sound like a scientific failure. It sounded like an event. The text read, Subject exposure time exceeded threshold. Neural feedback unresponsive. System output loop detected. Visual anomaly recorded within containment field. Subject presumed displaced. Displaced. Not deceased. Not destroyed. Displaced. When they played the archival footage tied to the test, the black and white screen showed Eleanor entering the chamber. She sat calmly in a metal chair, eyes closed, electrodes attached to her temples. Then, as the machine began to power, the magnetic field shimmered, distorting the film. The sound engineer noted an odd distortion on the reel, a faint whisper that only became audible after digital restoration. Mallory froze. That voice, the cadence, the accent, matched Eleanor's recorded interviews from the weeks before her disappearance. But what chilled him wasn't the whisper. It was what came after. A sudden flash of light filled the chamber. For 3 seconds, the frame turned pure white. When it returned, Eleanor was gone. The chair was empty. The instruments were still reading her neural activity, as though her consciousness was still present. But her body wasn't. The team suspected the machine had generated some kind of electromagnetic echo, a pulse that trapped or fragmented consciousness within a recurring field. The so-called loop that the Halpern scientist had theorized. And that would explain the film, the voices, the reappearing reflections. It wasn't haunting. It was feedback, the residue of a mind caught between 2 frequencies of time. When modern forensic analysts mapped the energy readings, they found that the machine's last activation produced a magnetic spike. The same pattern mirrored in every strange sighting. Every unexplained radio distortion reported in the area since 1964. Eleanor's presence was still cycling. Mallory made a fateful choice that night. Against protocol, he instructed the technicians to power the device once more, just enough to trace the pulse. The generator roared. The coils lit with blue-white light, and for a fleeting moment, they saw her. A figure formed inside the arch. Transparent, flickering. A woman's outline, face shimmering between decades. Her lips moved, and though no sound came through the speakers, Mallory read them perfectly. Stop the loop. The light collapsed. The generator blew, and when the smoke cleared, the chamber fell silent again. No trace of Eleanor remained. No trace of her echo. But the readings showed a short spike of temperature increase in the control panel, as if something alive had passed through. Mallory's report that night was marked classified /level 7. He was instructed never to discuss the machine again. The files were sealed under the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense. Yet one final document slipped through, a memo written by the lead scientist, Dr. Armitage Halpern, before his sudden death in 1970. It read, "The machine does not destroy time. It bends it. The subject becomes unstuck, seen only where consciousness overlaps itself. Whitmore is alive in the interference. God help us if she finds her way back. Alive in the interference. A soul caught between seconds. A consciousness suspended in the hum of an abandoned machine." And as investigators left the facility that night, Mallory turned off his recorder and said one final thing, his voice trembling just enough to be caught on the last few seconds of tape. "If she's still there, she's been waiting 60 years for us to listen." The loop opens. 2 days after the Ipswich facility was breached, the first disturbance appeared. A family living 12 miles away reported that their television began playing a black and white feed around 2 a.m. It showed a woman sitting in a metal chair, her outline blurred, her head tilted as though listening. Then the signal vanished, replaced by the national broadcast feed. When technicians checked the transmitter logs, they found no anomaly. No hack, no interference. Just one line of code added to the system memory. Cycle 8 resumed. At first, the Department of Defense dismissed it as coincidence, a residual magnetic surge. But as similar reports began flooding in from across Massachusetts, ham radio operators, CCTV technicians, even power station monitors, one chilling detail kept surfacing. The interference always lasted 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Exactly the same duration as Eleanor Whitmore's final recorded test cycle. Mallory returned to the site against orders. He couldn't let it go. The voice, the figure, the look in her eyes. Something inside him whispered that the machine hadn't shut down. It had restarted. When he reached the ruins of the Ipswich facility, the entry tunnel was still scorched from the explosion. But the deeper he went, the clearer the air felt. Almost alive, like the place itself was breathing. In the main chamber, the machine's arch still stood, the coils blackened but intact. And though the power lines had been severed, a faint blue glow pulsed from the control core. Steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Mallory raised his recorder. "This is Detective Mallory, October 17th, 2024. Unauthorized entry, Ipswich sublevel 5. The machine is active again. Repeat, active again." His voice trembled as he approached the control panel. The red lever that once read Cycle Initiate now flickered with a new label, crudely scrawled across the metal in fresh black ink. "She's coming back." Moments later, his recorder captured a surge of interference. Then silence. Mallory's voice faded mid-sentence, replaced by the sound of air moving violently, like a vacuum collapsing. When the backup unit retrieved from his vehicle was played the next morning, one sound emerged beneath the distortion. A woman's laughter. For investigators, it was the most damning evidence yet that the experiment's loop hadn't been theoretical. Whatever Eleanor Whitmore had become inside that machine, it was no longer confined to the 1960s. It had bridge time, and now the bridge was open. Over the following week, the disturbances spread. Streetlights flickered in patterns across Ipswich and Salem. 9 flashes, a pause, 9 more. Old analog televisions displayed brief bursts of static shaped like a woman's silhouette. A traffic camera on Route 1A captured a figure crossing the highway at 3:14 a.m., her gait slow, fluid, and her shadow moving the opposite direction of her body. Experts tried to explain it: data corruption, atmospheric distortion, or even a coordinated hoax. But the forensic timestamps on the footage carried one undeniable signature: a repeating signal embedded in the video file's metadata. Each read, Cycle 9, running. Mallory's disappearance forced the state to reopen the Whitmore case. But as they dug deeper, investigators discovered a chain reaction that reached back decades. Files declassified from the Department of Defense revealed that Halpern Industries had once been contracted under a secret initiative called Project Echo, a Cold War attempt to weaponize consciousness through resonance frequencies. If successful, it would allow agents to echo within enemy communication networks, distorting signals, even appearing as voices or images. Whitmore had been the first civilian volunteer, and possibly the only survivor. By 2025, researchers monitoring the Ipswich region recorded periodic electromagnetic pulses, spiking exactly every 60 years to the minute from the date of the experiment. The next surge was due in 3 days. Local residents began reporting sightings again. A woman in outdated 1960s clothing walking near the shoreline at dawn. Some swore she tried to speak to them. Others said she simply stared, as though seeing the world from a distance, recognizing nothing. Those who approached her described a strange sensation, a ringing in their ears, a pressure behind the eyes, and in some cases, memories that didn't belong to them. Whatever Eleanor Whitmore had become, she was no longer a woman lost in time. She was a frequency, a pattern looping endlessly, searching for a way to complete the cycle. And with Mallory gone, the only person who might understand how to stop it was buried in the machine's original blueprints. Dr. Armitage Halpern had left one final schematic hidden within his notes, and it pointed to something buried even deeper beneath the Ipswich ruins. A secondary power source, labeled simply Cycle Reset Core. That phrase would soon take on a new meaning, because if the machine could start a loop, it could also close one. But to do that, someone would have to go back into the field, to reactivate the machine from inside the frequency itself. And so began the final operation, a race against time, against memory, and against the echo of a woman who had waited 60 years to finish her story. Because if they failed, the loop wouldn't just remain open. It would spread, turning every device, every signal, every reflection into another doorway for her to step through. Cycle reset. In the weeks after Detective Mallory's disappearance, the Department of Defense sealed the Ipswich site again. But strange reports continued to leak out. A private construction team, brought in to stabilize the tunnels, found a second chamber beneath sublevel 5, a space untouched by the original fire. Inside, sealed behind lead-lined walls, they discovered a machine smaller than the first, circular like a capsule or containment pod, and marked with a simple engraved phrase, Cycle Reset Core. The device was intact. No signs of fire damage, no corrosion, just a thin layer of dust, as if it had been waiting. And on a glass viewport, someone had written with their fingertip, long ago, "She's still in here." The scientists who reopened the investigation brought in a new specialist, Dr. Iris Calder, a theoretical physicist and neural mapping expert. Her work centered on quantum consciousness, the theory that memory and perception could exist outside the body, as a kind of electromagnetic residue. When she studied the reset core schematics, her conclusion was both terrifying and extraordinary. This wasn't built to reverse the machine, she said. It was built to reach into it. According to the internal wiring, the reset core could open a controlled resonance field, matching the same frequency the original machine emitted in 1964. It wouldn't pull someone out. It would let someone go in. That realization changed everything. Because if Eleanor Whitmore's consciousness really was trapped in an endless feedback loop between moments of time, then the only way to close the loop was from inside it. The operation was codenamed Project Recall. Its goal: synchronize a human subject's neural signature with the machine's frequency. To re-enter the loop, locate Whitmore's residual pattern, and manually trigger the reset from within the echo field. No AI simulation could predict the outcome. Exposure beyond 9 minutes was considered fatal. Dr. Calder volunteered. The night before the activation, she recorded a final audio log. Eleanor wasn't the experiment's failure. She was its proof. They built a machine to erase memory and found a door instead. If she's still in there, I'll find her. At 11:59 p.m. on October 20th, 2024, the reset core was powered on for the first time in 60 years. Energy levels climbed beyond predicted thresholds. The resonance field formed, a slow swirl of light and static within the chamber. Dr. Calder stepped inside. For a brief second, her image flickered across every monitor in the lab. Then she vanished. Inside the machine, her sensors recorded something no scientist could explain. Her brainwave pattern expanded, fracturing into multiple frequencies, each one representing a different timeline, each one a version of herself observing the same moment. In one, she stood in darkness. In another, she was surrounded by light that shimmered like water. And in the third, she heard footsteps. A woman's voice called from somewhere beyond the static. "You shouldn't have come here." Dr. Calder turned toward the sound. Through the white haze, a figure emerged. A woman in a gray wool coat, hair tied back, eyes full of both terror and recognition. Eleanor Whitmore. Her outline flickered like film stock burning on a projector reel. But when Calder spoke, the figure stopped trembling. "Eleanor," she said, "it's 2024. We're here to bring you home." Whitmore's head tilted slightly, and for the first time in 60 years, her voice came through clear, not through speakers, not through distortion, but through the air itself. "You can't bring me back," she said. "I never left." Calder realized then, the loop wasn't just a cage. It was a copy. The machine had duplicated Eleanor's consciousness at the moment of exposure, trapping the echo inside an endless playback. To end it, she had to merge the copies, real and reflected, back into one. The only way to do that was to collapse the field from within. Calder placed her hands on the chamber wall. Her pulse synced with the frequency. Her sensors began to spike, the loop tightening, the machine straining to hold both consciousnesses at once. Then, for a brief instant, the monitors in the control room lit up with twin signals. One labeled C01 Calder, the other W04 Whitmore. Their heart rates matched. Their brainwaves merged. In that single instant, both women occupied the same moment in time. Whitmore reached out, and Calder heard her whisper something only the microphones caught. "Tell them I was never gone." Then the readings flatlined. The hum stopped, and silence fell across the lab. When a containment door opened, the chamber was empty. The energy spike collapsed. The field readings vanished, and the power grid across 3 counties flickered out for nearly 2 full minutes. When the lights returned, a faint image appeared on one of the cracked monitors. A woman's reflection staring straight into the camera. But it wasn't Calder. It wasn't quite Whitmore either. It was both, merged and smiling faintly. The reset core shut itself down seconds later, locking its interface permanently. Every subsequent attempt to power it failed. It was as though the machine had finally gone quiet. Its loop complete. Dr. Calder was never found. Officially, she was declared missing in action. But one final anomaly occurred a week later. A voice recording left on the facility's dormant intercom system. A woman's voice, calm, steady, familiar, said, "Cycle closed. Time restored." The Ipswich site was buried permanently under concrete that winter. All remaining data was classified, and yet, somewhere between the silence of frequencies and the static of old recordings, Eleanor Whitmore's voice still lingers. Not haunting, not trapped, just waiting. Echoes through time. The Ipswich laboratory no longer exists. Its foundations were buried, its tunnels sealed, and its records erased from every public archive. But in Massachusetts, Whispers still drift through the old mill towns. Stories told quietly in cafes. By people who swear they heard the hum again. Not loud, not mechanical, just a low vibration beneath the floorboards. Like the earth remembering something it once held. 5 months after the shutdown, a local ham radio operator in Gloucester reported an unidentified broadcast. The transmission lasted only 27 seconds. Static, followed by a woman's voice reciting a single phrase. Over and over again. Frequency 0. Cycle complete. She is awake. The coordinates embedded in the audio pointed not to Ipswich, but to the Whitmore family's original estate. A small, weathered home on the outskirts of Andover. Abandoned since 1965. When investigators arrived, they found the property untouched. No footprints, no signs of entry. Except for one thing. On the living room table sat an old tape recorder, the exact same model used by the lab technicians 6 decades earlier. It was switched on, the tape was still spinning, and the reel bore a fresh label in neat handwriting. Cycle 02, restart. Whitmore's voice, distorted but clear. If you're hearing this, the loop didn't end. We only changed its shape. Every cycle must have an observer. Those who analyzed the tape noticed something else. In the background, barely audible, was another voice overlapping hers. Dr. Iris called her. Consciousness cannot die, she said quietly. It only transfers. The implications were terrifying. It meant the merge hadn't destroyed the system. It had evolved it. A new loop had begun, anchored not by machines or memory, but by human observation itself. And as months passed, reports began surfacing from across the state. People waking from dreams of rooms they'd never seen, reciting fragments of equations, or describing Dr. Whitmore's laboratory in perfect detail, even though it was erased decades before they were born. Experts called it memory contagion. The press labeled it a digital haunting. But one theory, written anonymously on an encrypted forum, offered a chilling explanation. The experiment succeeded. Human consciousness is now entangled, and every time someone remembers Eleanor Whitmore, the cycle resets. Think about that. Every retelling, every documentary, every whisper of her name, may be feeding the same feedback loop she tried to escape. Perhaps that's what she meant by her final message. Tell them I was never gone. Because maybe she isn't. Maybe she's here, listening through the current of our voices, watching through the flicker of our screens, existing in the echo between sound and silence. In one of the final classified transcripts, a technician recorded hearing faint typing sounds on a disconnected terminal inside the Ipswich site. When they printed the screen buffer, this sentence appeared repeatedly. Cycle stable. Observer active. The timestamp? August 2025, decades after the project was declared closed. So, the question remains, did the machine die, or did it simply move beyond our understanding? In the end, the Whitmore experiment was more than just a case file. It was a crime against the fabric of life itself, a collision between ambition, secrecy, and the human cost of knowledge. One woman vanished into a machine meant to rewrite minds, and another followed her to bring the truth back. Their legacy stands as both a warning and a mystery, proof that progress without conscience always leaves ghosts behind. If there's justice in this story, it's in remembrance, in keeping Eleanor's name alive, not as a failed experiment, but as a symbol of what happens when curiosity crosses the line. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story made you think, if it chilled you, or even made you question what's real, please like, share, and comment below. Your voice keeps these stories alive, and your criticism helps us grow stronger. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and never stop searching for the truth. In a world that runs on logic and data, the Whitmore cycle reminds us that some mysteries don't end, they transform. Maybe consciousness isn't limited to the body. Maybe time, memory, and emotion are threads in a tapestry we only glimpse in flashes. Every question leaves an echo, and sometimes that echo becomes the answer. So as you step away from this story tonight, ask yourself, What if every memory you hold is part of someone else's loop? What if every dream is another consciousness reaching back? If you felt that chill, if your curiosity was sparked, then like, share, and comment your thoughts below. We welcome your theories and even your criticism, because every discussion helps us dive deeper into the unknown. Until our next investigation, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, the greatest mysteries are the ones still watching us. Some say time heals all wounds. Others know time only hides them. Eleanor Whitmore's return reminds us that the past is never truly gone. It waits like light trapped beneath ice, until the right question cracks it open. Her story isn't just about science or fate. It's about the echoes that connect us, the unseen threads between memory, loss, and discovery. If this mystery stirred something in you, like this video, share it with fellow seekers, and leave your thoughts below. We welcome your interpretations, your doubts, your wonder. Every voice helps us see deeper into the fog of time. Subscribe to our growing community of storytellers and investigators, because every solved mystery begins with one listener who refuses to look away.